Hello, it's Trevor Dean here, and I've prepared these slides to talk to you about the module Afterlives, Ancient Gods and Heroes in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. This is a module that's shared between history and classical civilization. I am a historian of the Renaissance period in Italy, but I have also taught on the classical civilization degree program since its inception, really, about 20 years ago. This module is very much a follow-on module for you as historians, a follow-on from Medieval Worlds, but we'll be looking in much greater depth at cultural history, which we covered in, I think, one session in Medieval Worlds. Through that approach, through that deep approach to cultural history, we'll be looking, in fact, at many important historical topics, such as gender and sexuality, ethnicity, religion, and power. Now, this first slide has two figures. I hope you recognise both of them. One on the left is obviously Cupid, and the one on the right is Hercules. So we have the malicious boy god of love, and we have Hercules, the strong man hero. Now we might ask, are these images? Who are these figures? How did they get here? And what are they doing? Obviously on the left, we recognise that as Cupid, but how did we do that? And it's interesting to note how Cupid has come to symbolise Saint Valentine's Day. So in other words, Cupid, an ancient pagan deity, has displaced a Christian saint on this particular day. So that's a very interesting process in itself. So, I now want to move on to slide 2 to show some of the images we shall be looking at in the module and what we can do with them. So, slide 2, and here we have two images from 15th century Florence in Italy. One on the left is Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and the one on the right is by an artist called Pollaiuolo, and it shows Hercules killing the Hydra. And I hope you can see immediately what we can do with these two pictures by contrasting them in terms of gender. On the right, on the left, we have Venus, goddess of love, static, doing nothing much other than covering herself and looking at us. On the right, we have Hercules very actively involved in killing one of the monsters in one of the ancient labours that he performed. The picture on the left is Botticelli is very much the face of the Renaissance. And if there's one painting that comes to symbolise the Renaissance to modern reception, it is this figure of Venus, and it's been endlessly copied, parodied, caricatured in modern art and in advertising and so on. So it's a painting of enormous impact and power in itself. I'm going to move on to slide 3 now. Here I want to talk about the content of the module and the approach we'll be taking. So the content covers many of the greats of European art and literary history. So I've just mentioned two there, Botticelli, Michelangelo. Portrait of Michelangelo is top right on the slide. But many others, such as Mantegna and Titian. In literary history, we'll look at passages from Dante's great work, Divine Comedy, from Boccaccio, and works by Christine de Pizan, who I think is familiar to you from Medieval Worlds. She is bottom right in the slide. Dante is on the left there. So you will learn about many of the great works from this period of European history. The approach we shall take is an approach from classics, and it is reception studies. And in reception studies, the idea is that the meaning of a text, the meaning of an image, is constructed by the context. So that's where it meets history. History is very much about contextualization. So we'll be joining these two things together, contextualizing images of classical figures and joining that with the reception studies approach. Just want to flag up one element, one aspect of the module that we shall be looking at sensitive subjects, such as rape and suicide. So you need to be aware of that before you sign up for the module. So, last slide, I just want to talk about assessment. The assessment for the module is two 1,500-word commentaries, one from the first half of the module and one from the second half of the module, and it's an open menu. We look at a very wide range of objects, artworks, and texts, and you can choose to write a commentary on any of those that you choose. Obviously, there are some which are sort of obvious and they're very popular, such as Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and there are others where students find lesser known texts to write about. So if you've got any questions, do please email me. There's the email address, and I look forward to seeing you next year.
Hello there, my name's Michael Brown, and I am the module convener for British Society in War and Peace, 1880 to 1950. I just wanted to have a brief chat with you today to tell you a little bit about the module and the kinds of its structure, content, and assessment. Normally, I would obviously be doing this in person at the module options fair, but because of current circumstances and the need for remote learning at the moment, I'm doing this virtually from home. Before I introduce the module itself, I thought I might tell you a little bit about myself, because many of you, I suspect all of you, won't know who I am. My name is, as I said, Michael Brown. I'm Reader in History at Roehampton. I've been at Roehampton for about 10 years now. I am a social and cultural historian of modern Britain, particularly 19th century Britain, from the late 18th, long 19th century, from the late 18th to the early 20th century. I have a range of different interests. I'm particularly interested in the history of medicine and surgery, but I've also worked extensively on the history of war, and a lot of the stuff I do is kind of using the interpretive prisms of gender and increasingly the emotions. And in fact, this will be my first time teaching for a while, because for the last 3 years I've been running a project, a Wellcome Trust funded project, on the history of surgery and emotion in 19th century Britain, and I'm currently finishing my book on that topic. And you can actually check out, if you're interested, there's a link here to the actual project website if you're interested in our content and its output. But in terms of British Society in War and Peace, this module explores a really profound period of tremendous change in British society from the late 19th to the mid-20th centuries. It's a period of great upheaval, most obviously, of course, with the two world wars, as well as economic depression, two economic depressions, and also kind of huge changes in kind of social and cultural mores and behaviours. And actually, I mean, this module, it deals with a lot of politics, but actually it's really not a political history module. It's a module that explores the kind of impact of these changes on kind of ordinary people's lives. And it's, again, particularly interested in the kind of impact of these changes on gender relations, on notions of what it is to be a man or a woman. And you'll see that in some of the themes that emerge in the next kind of slide. We're also, of course, interested in huge changes in class and class relations. And this picture you can see here on the slide represents is an image of a painting of the arrival of the Jarrow Marchers into London during the Great Depression. And we can see here this kind of contrast between the leisured classes of this era and those from the industrial north in particular, who were suffering great privation during the 1930s because of the Great Depression, or Great Slump as it was known in Britain. Now, the module itself explores these issues through a combination of lectures and seminars. So I'll start off really with a kind of seminar providing the overall context for that theme, and then in the second half of the session we'll have a seminar based discussion, really focusing on kind of primary sources as well as kind of a relevant secondary source, which I'll ask you to read. So one of the things I really want to do in this module is kind of bring home the kind of key things to you and get you involved in discussing these things through an engagement with exciting and interesting primary sources, a variety of different types of source, both textual, visual, and audio-visual as well. The assessment for the module takes the form of two pieces of work. One is a source commentary of 1,500 words, which makes up 25% of the mark. As I say, each week we'll be looking at a particular source and discussing it, and those sources will provide the kind of basis for that assessment. However, if there's another source that we don't cover, I really encourage you to kind of seek out your own sources, as long as you clear them with me first and use those as the basis for your source commentary. So things we've done in the past, for example, will be like First World War recruiting posters and those kinds of visual sources, as well as the kind of textual sources that we're looking at. So as well as the source commentary, there is an essay of 2,500 words, which makes up 75% of the overall mark, and that's again based on a kind of set list of essay questions that refer to the key themes of the module. Now, the module itself is divided basically into 10 sessions. The first session is basically an introduction to the module as a whole. At the moment, of course, because of the uncertainty of current circumstances, I don't know if this will be delivered in person or virtually. Normally what I do is kind of provide some context for Britain in the late 19th century. We also watch some kind of films, Richard Kenyon films from the very early 20th century to kind of give you a sense of what life was like in Britain at that time. So after that, the first kind of session proper is one which looks at the British economy in the late 19th century. This might sound a bit dry, perhaps, but it's really vital for understanding sort of Britain's role in the world in this period. In the late 19th century, Britain experienced, as does the rest of the world, a profound economic depression, and this is seen as many people as the kind of beginning of Britain's decline as a kind of global political and industrial power. And declinism, as we'll see, is something which kind of is a key theme throughout much of the period. In the third session, rather, we'll be looking at the issue of Britain and empire, and considering to what extent Britain in the late 19th century can be considered an imperialistic nation, to what extent did empire inform British people's sense of themselves, how did it inform British politics, and indeed what were the politics of empire in this period. It's the 1880s and onwards, and sees a kind of, in fact, a kind of revival of imperial expansion, particularly in Africa and other parts of the world. After that, we'll be looking in session 4. We'll be looking at women's place in British society in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and looking, of course, in particular at the women's suffrage movement in its various forms, and women make increasing demands for political inclusion and also greater opportunities in the workplace. And then the next two sessions, 5 and 6, are really looking, obviously, at the cataclysmic events of the First World War. And again, they're sort of separated into kind of two approaches, both of which kind of explore issues of gender, but the first of which really looks at combat and the front line in the First World War, the experience in the First World War, and its impact on kind of notions of masculinity, and kind of drawing on what we've looked at with kind of imperialism, how that reshapes notions of what it is to be a man in Edwardian Britain. And the session after that, session 6, looks at women's role in British society during the First World War, in particular, the kind of women's war work and women's contribution to the war effort, and how that kind of shapes ideas about women's place in society. In session 7, we're back to kind of economics, but again, looking into the prism of looking into kind of its impact on everyday people, and we'll be looking at the Great Depression of the 1930s and the kind of differential impact of the Great Depression on different parts of British society, but also again how it shapes ideas about how work and ideas relates to ideas about masculinity and self-worth and all those kinds of things, and how lack of work has an impact upon those ideologies. And in session 8, we'll be continuing to focus on the interwar period, and again we'll be looking at gender relations and kind of the profound changes in notions of love and marital relationships that kind of being shaped in the interwar period, and which kind of moving away from kind of perhaps Victorian notions of marriage to what we might recognise as more modern conceptions of mutual love and companionable marriage, which kind of really set the basis for kind of modern notions of married life. And the session 9 is looking at the Second World War. This is a kind of military history of the Second World War. This is really looking at the impact of the Second War on British society, particularly exploring the kind of the home front and both the myths and the realities of Britain's kind of collective experience of the Second World War. And in the final session, we'll be looking at how the war kind of shapes the experience of the war shapes post-war politics and society, and looking in particular at the Labour government of 1945 and its revolutionary policies in terms of the welfare state, the creation of the NHS, social security, and basically exploring how the kind of experience of what had gone before, all the way really back from the beginning of the course, shapes notions of what the citizen can expect from its government, the kind of rights and responsibilities of citizenship in modern Britain. So that's a brief guide to the course. I hope you find it interesting. If you have any questions, please contact me by email. My email is michael.brown@hampton.ac.uk, or just simply sign up to the module. I look forward to teaching you in due course. Thanks a lot.
Hello, my name is Sebastian Gehrig, and I'm going to teach this brand new second year option called Cold War Internationalisms, Transnational Encounters, Reconfigurations of Nationalism and Globalization, 1945 to 1989. Now, the syllabus for this new module looks as follows. We're going to start in week 1 with a session that looks at Cold Warriors, post-war liberal internationalism, that focuses mainly on the transatlantic Western alliance with Britain and the US at its center, and ask how liberalism or liberal ideas are transformed into a Cold War homefront against communism, what new types of organizations are formed to facilitate that, and how the US and the American politicians try to build an internationalist Cold War cause against the Soviet Union. Week 2 then sort of flips sides, and we look at Brothers in Arms, Socialist Internationalism. That session actually goes back to the October Revolution in 1917 and the interwar years, and asks how internationalist politics have emanated from the Soviet Union even before World War II, but then how this internationalism is again transformed after 1945 in a new Cold War alliance and organizational platform to advocate for communist ideals on the international scale. Week 3 then goes away from that classic Cold War framework of West against East and looks at third ways, non-alignment, third world internationalism, and the rise of the global South. So actually what we try to do is to decenter the history of internationalism, or provincialize Europe as it's often called, and ask how important is Africa, Asia, and Latin America and political groups working together across decolonized state borders and advocate actually for a third way next to communism and American style capitalism in the new Cold War world. After these 3 weeks that mainly focus on politics, we're going to look at bands of believers and look at the importance of religion and religious internationalism of Christian and Islamic groups and other religious groups, and how they might underpin that classic political framework that we associate with the Cold War, and how important religion actually is and how it features after World War II in international politics. Then in week 5, we look at workers' activism and the importance of class and labor associations that increasingly work across national borders. Again, that goes back to the interwar period in looking at the International Labour Organization as one of the key international organizations of the 20th century. And we look at how class and workers' activism actually continues to play an important role as an internationalist cause. Week 6 then looks at internationalist technocrats. That's civil servants, lawyers, scientific experts that increasingly work in organizations like the United Nations, the emerging European Union, global health organizations, and we'll ask whether there's a new type or a new figure of the technocrat that actually really drives institution building that is international or internationalist after 1945. Week 7 then looks at humanitarianism and global public health, a quite pertinent topic these days. We think about how epidemics, pandemics, global health crises tied to war, famine, or illnesses are actually sort of reshaping agendas of working together across national borders to tackle these issues, and what types of institutions and political activism actually grows out of these ideas. Week 8 then looks at human rights and rights activism. That centers again at the United Nations, but also looks at women's human rights activism, minority discrimination, racial discrimination activism, and how this becomes an issue that is conceived as something that works across national borders and is in and of itself an internationalist project. And we're going to investigate that critically, to what extent there is a new universalism of rights that we nowadays associate with the term human rights. Week 9 then looks at capital, the history of capitalism, and how Cold War internationalism actually might be underpinned by frameworks that grow out of empires still, both on the side of Western countries and how capital flows between Western states, but also how the Soviet Union and the Socialist Bloc is involved in building new financial structures that we nowadays associate with the term globalization, that's often sort of pinpointed in the 1970s, that we have the departure into a new globalized financial and industrial world. And we ask how internationalist projects or frameworks actually facilitate this, that already begin to evolve after 1945. Week 10, then we try to bring all of this together in a last session on internationalism, globalization, and new histories of the post-war era. And in that, we're going to try to explore how new historical approaches like entangled history, global history, have transformed international histories of the Cold War or the post-war era after 1945, and how these perspectives that actually try to decenter the nation state and look at interconnections between people in networks of institutions or non-governmental organizations or religious groups and churches, etc., actually give us a new perspective on the second half of the 20th century. Now, the main themes for the new module are therefore that we try to explore cultural, political, and economic drives to globalize or internationalize particular issues, that we try to provincialize Europe in this history of the 20th century and ask how important are Africa, Asia, and Latin America, other parts of the world. So we try not to tell a Western or Europe-centered history, but really ask how these internationalist projects maybe allow us also to tell a new kind of Cold War history that is not centered on the US and the Soviet Union. So we ask about the role of these internationalist projects in the transition from empire to a nation-state dominated international politics, something that we associate with the term of decolonization. So how do these internationalist projects actually help to transform the world from an imperial into a nation-state-based international order? So there's an emphasis on transnational and transcultural encounters of people, as I already said. So that's what we're basically going to look at in different settings. History of internationalist networks, UN and NGOs, and how that transforms our understanding of Cold War history. And in the end, we want to critically reassess narratives of globalization in the 20th century and ask how these internationalist groups maybe compete and how important the nation state actually remains underneath this sort of very popular narrative of an increasing globalization in the 20th century. Important for this is that we still keep in mind that traditional or classic categories of historical analysis like class, gender, race, and religion actually remain incredibly important in these processes. And all in all, I'll try to tell you a little bit more about new historical approaches of international, entangled, and global history so that you have another set of historical approaches in your historian's toolkit to work with in second year and then going into third year. You probably wonder how this looks like in individual seminars. So I'm always going to start setting the scene with a short lecture. Then we'll have each week group presentations that you prepare based on material that I'll provide you with. And then we go on to broaden what I tell you in a lecture and what the group presentation tells us in seminar debates. And for that, it's really crucial and important that you complete the set readings for each week. And as seminar work that we'll do quite frequently, we will do primary source work in groups with a great variety of different materials ranging from maps to paintings, cartoons, postcards, political speeches, diary entries. So you learn and get more comfortable working with primary sources and making sense of them through the seminar as well. Now, most importantly, you probably ask yourself, how is this all assessed? And all of this will be assessed by an essay that you write at the end of the seminar, which is 3,000 words long. We will have individual essay meetings in which you can bring first essay plans and we discuss your ideas so I can help you with feedback, developing the essay before you then go away and complete the assessment and submit the essay at the end of term. I hope that gave you a bit of an idea how this new module looks like, because you can't ask the current year above because that module didn't run last year. If you have further questions, please get in touch, and I look forward to seeing many of you next year teaching this new exciting module. Thank you.